You are a minority. Yes, you. We all are minorities one way or another. There are minorities and majorities everywhere, from hair color to eye color to skin color. Of course, many minorities don't face a lot of trouble for who they are. Green-eyed people, hockey players, the rich. But for those who are what we commonly think of as minorities here in my part of the world, black and brown people, Muslims and Jews, queer and trans people, the left wing, etc., it can be tough. Now, I'm not going to go on a tirade about discrimination yet because this video isn't about that. This video is about one of the ways I, as a gay guy, deal with being outnumbered, blending in. So, what is the facade of masculinity anyways? Well, let's take the stereotype of what masculinity looks like.
Masculinity stereotype. That's so gay. Don't be such a girl. You don't like sports? Be strong. Real men don't cry. Boys don't play with dolls. How many times have you scored? Okay, that one's a little bit corny, but you get the idea.
Now, men don't naturally act like this. It's not in their DNA to like drinking beer and watching monster trucks. Many of these traits come from the fragile facade of masculinity. Basically, it's how this hides this. Those men who act all bold, uncaring, and free on the outside, but deep down crave meaningful human connection and economic stability. We'll go more in depth on why those insecurities exist in the first place later, but let's lighten the mood with some examples first. Example 1. John, weightlifting. If you've ever been to a gym, you've seen this guy. His protein shake, ready. His creatine, in an intimidatingly large jar. His muscles, suspiciously veiny. However, what the gym does for him is scratch the itch of control over destiny, the self-determination to say, I can do whatever I want in my life. Because, let's face it, he can't. Maybe he's having trouble making friends. Maybe he's in a dead-end job. Maybe he was raised to believe that physical strength comes first and emotional strength will follow. Now, I'm not saying that every guy who works out a lot is like this, because they're not. There are very few absolutes in this world. It just happens to be easier for a lot of men to put effort into moving a bar up and down than to put effort into growing emotionally, making friends, and admitting that they aren't in complete control of their own destiny. Example 2. Adam Big Truck. You know this guy. He's what many in the business call a pavement princess. This guy's defining trait is his massive and expensive truck that suspiciously is always clean and shiny. He drives it not to off-road, but to flex on the other suburban men and to endanger the life of any pedestrian who dares cross his path. This stereotype is relatively new, as trucks only started growing in size rapidly a couple of decades ago. There's a whole host of reasons for this, but what you've got to know is that at the end of the day, it's pretty plain to see that the guy who buys these trucks has a very fragile facade of masculinity that can only be held up by the distraction of material goods. It's another classic case of men wanting to determine their own destiny, saying to themselves, if I can buy a big expensive truck, that shows that I really am economically free. Except usually, these trucks are bought on predatory payment plans, with drivers often taking years to pay back their vehicle, sacrificing long-term economic success for that burst of satisfaction that comes from being the biggest car on the road, and proving to themselves and others that they can afford everything they want. Now that you've seen two other facades of masculinity, I can tell you a little bit about my own. My experience. I'm not going to go out and say I've had the worst experience with being a minority because let's face it, me having the free time to make this video shows I've got a lot more than what a lot of other people have. That being said, I've nonetheless had a unique and troubling experience that's worth a second look. Something very unique about me is that I'm one of the very times 100 rare gay guys who play soccer at a high level. I know gay guys who do running, gymnastics, and other sports, but I've never met a gay guy who plays soccer competitively. Or even one who's a soccer fan for that matter. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that I'd love to get into, but I'll stay on topic for now. It's no secret that soccer culture, or sports culture more broadly, is pretty homophobic, and it definitely holds up the telltale signs of fragile masculinity. After all, nothing screams super straight more than watching a bunch of sweaty men playing with big round balls. I've spent a lot of time playing soccer, and before I realized I was gay, it was pretty much my whole personality. So naturally, I put in a lot of effort to getting good. I didn't want that work to go to nothing, so what I ended up doing was, you guessed it, donning the facade of masculinity. Yo, what up guys? It's super manly me right now. So basically, I just talk like this when I'm acting straight. Cause I'm a goalie, I gotta yell real loud and stuff to my teammates, so I end up using it a lot. This is a classic facade of masculinity, and yeah, I'm an expert. Okay, enough of that. But you see what I mean, right? That's not who I am. I don't deepen my voice because I'm insecure. Okay, maybe a little sometimes. It's mostly just for tactical reasons. Deep voices carry longer, and these straight boys love a manly man telling them what to do out on the field. That aside, I think the real reason I put on those mannerisms, pun intended, is because, well, I'm scared of being singled out for being gay. Granted, no one's walked up to me and called me a slur, but I have heard the occasional player say fag or gay in passing conversation. And let's just say, you wouldn't find one of those guys with a pride flag in their bio. Side note, some people celebrated after Trump won last year that they could say the R word again. Clearly, those people are either lying or have never been around sports boys for the last few years. You could swear they were all brushing up on their French terms for latency. Anyway, even though no homophobe has went out and called me what I am, I do know that these boys tend to be secretive and talk behind backs. Actually, I think everyone does that to an extent, even me, but I don't do it in an evil way. That being said, I do consider myself one of the luckier gay sports boys. For all the closet homos out there on the field, I know there are more than a few, probably didn't grow up in a progressive family in a progressive-ish city, engaging in progressive online communities. That background definitely helped me be out and true to who I was, to an extent, and I just feel bad for all the guys who can't be the same, and I don't blame them, of course. I blame capitalism. Okay, let me explain here. You know, in these sorts of videos where people discuss the bad things happening, like discrimination, genocide, poverty, toxic masculinity, etc., something often seems to elude us: the root cause. Well, in most cases, that root cause is capitalism. Here, let me trace it back for you. A main cause of me, people like me, and even people not like me putting on the facade of masculinity is discrimination. More specifically, the fear of it. This part is pretty obvious, but what causes discrimination? Do humans discriminate naturally? Of course not, it's capitalism. Let me provide some evidence for this claim. This is Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States, talking about race relations in the American colonies, a place where capitalism was epitomized and labor exploitation was on another level. From time to time, whites were involved in the slave resistance. As early as 1663, indentured white servants and black slaves in Gloucester County, Virginia, formed a conspiracy to rebel and gain their freedom. The plot was betrayed and ended with executions. Mullen reports that the newspaper notices of runaways in Virginia often warned ill-disposed whites about harboring fugitives. Sometimes slaves and free men ran off together or cooperated in crimes together. Sometimes black male slaves ran off and joined white women. From time to time, white ship captains and watermen dealt with runaways, perhaps making the slave a part of the crew. In New York in 1941, there were 10,000 whites in the city and 2,000 black slaves. It had been a hard winter, and the poor, slave and free, had suffered greatly. When mysterious fires broke out, blacks and whites were accused of conspiring together. Mass hysteria developed against the accused. After a trial full of lurid accusations by informers and forced confessions, 2 white men and 2 white women were executed, 18 slaves were hanged, and 13 slaves were burned alive. Only one fear was greater than the fear of black rebellion in the new American colonies. That was the fear that discontented whites would join black slaves to overthrow the existing order. In the early days of slavery, especially before racism as a way of thinking was firmly ingrained, while white indentured servants were often treated as badly as black slaves, there was a possibility of cooperation. As Edmund Morgan sees it, there are hints that the two despised groups initially saw each other as sharing the same predicament. It was common, for example, for servants and slaves to run away together, steal hogs together, get drunk together. It was not uncommon for them to make love together. In Bacon's Rebellion, one of the last groups to surrender was a mixed band of 80 black slaves and 20 English servants. As Morgan says, masters, initially at least, perceived slaves in much the same way they had always perceived servants: shiftless, irresponsible, unfaithful, ungrateful, dishonest. And if free men with disappointed hopes should make common cause with slaves of desperate hope, the results might be worse than anything Bacon had done. And so, measures were taken. This is one piece of many that shows how racial discrimination is not a natural phenomenon, as if it was, there would be no white servants teaming up with black slaves. The very fact that under all the horrors of slavery and servitude, those who suffered did not go for the easy targets of each other to get a leg up proves that humanity is not meant to discriminate against itself. Now you might say, hold on, this is colonialism, not capitalism. Well, I'll give you the short explanation. Capitalism relies on constant expansion, as those on top will always want more. That's how they got there. Well, once Columbus did his thing, all the capitalists of Europe saw the newly accessible resources, labor, and land in the New World, and well, the rest is history. Speaking of colonies, time for another slightly related tangent. Capitalism is also why Israel exists and is committing genocide. In the early 1900s, capitalists like Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh, and of course, Adolf Hitler put the blame on Jews for all the poverty capitalism was causing. It wasn't the rich's fault for you having to send your kids to the sweatshops and the coal mines, it was the Jews. In 1917, this guy named Arthur Balfour, not a Jew by the way, made a declaration on behalf of the British government, arguably the most powerful government in the world at that time, saying that there should be created in Palestine, then a British colony, a national home for the Jewish people, and that Europe's Jews should move there. I would go more in depth, but I think you get the gist. Capitalism leads to discrimination against Jews, leads to Israel, leads to genocide. Tangent over, back to the subject of this video. The facade of masculinity. Why does it exist in the first place? What's it caused by? Well, I was just talking about discrimination. The specific form of discrimination? Homophobia, by its original definition. The fear of being perceived as homosexual. So, where does this form of discrimination come from? No, not nature. You should know this by now. Let me check my sources here. Wait a minute. It comes from multiple different factors that require an in-depth explanation? Get ready, folks. It's time to hop aboard the train of thought. In the time before colonialism, when there were no slave ships, no Caribbean plantations, no British East India Company, there existed many different attitudes towards the gays across the world. We all know that medieval Europeans really hated our guts, but there existed many other places where homosexual and homosexual adjacent behaviors were completely normal. However, once the colonizers got to colonizing, there was a problem. These Christians really hated homos, and I mean really. They hated many parts of the indigenous cultures they couldn't control, but homosexuality especially, something that was punishable by death back home, being practiced freely and openly in the New World. Those European colonizers wouldn't have it. So, they sent wave after wave of missionaries, executed wave after wave of indigenous people of all sexualities and genders, not just in the Americas, but in Africa, Asia, and Oceania too. Eventually, the colonizers were able to pray most of that gay away. This erasure was of course part of the larger machine of genocide, part of the larger machine of colonialism, part of the largest machine, the root cause, capitalism. So capitalism is the reason why the world's biggest religion is one that, in most places, is synonymous with the rejection of homosexuality. As for the second biggest religion, Islam, there's a whole lot more to talk about there. I'll link a video below that goes deeper into those nuances. I've said that homophobia was just one of the causes of fragile masculinity. Well, what's the other? It's economic insecurity. Let me mansplain some feminism for you. Most Western, or at least American culture before the second wave of feminism in the 60s and 70s centered the nuclear family. the man being the breadwinner and the woman being the housewife. However, being a housewife kinda sucked. You lost a lot of freedom and had really no way out of the arrangement you got stuck in at a young age. Especially for poorer women, who also had to help make ends meet for the family with long days of labor followed by cooking, cleaning, taking care of children, and numerous other responsibilities not given to men. That's not to mention all the marital rape. The cultural shift that came with the second wave of feminism allowed a lot of women to break free of these restrictions and force men to do their fair share in the house. Of course, capitalists saw this as a golden opportunity for exploitation. Now with two adults working at jobs and at home, they could take advantage by making them work more. After all, for these capitalists, any opportunity to make more money was snapped up. This phenomenon was accelerated during the Ronald Reagan era of the 1980s, where huge cutbacks on social safety nets and regulations made a lot of money for capitalists and ballooned wealth inequality, deepening economic insecurity over time for the average Joe. This deepening economic insecurity, coupled with the previously less common experience of having both adults in a household working full-time jobs becoming more common, meant that many men felt all the things they were promised in life, both morally good and bad from our modern perspective, like a stable livelihood, authority in their household, and economic freedom, slipped through their fingers. Thus, these men would need something to cover this up, to help them avoid looking at the depressive circumstances they were in. Something like a facade. Yes, a facade of masculinity would be perfect for capitalists. The weightlifting, the big trucks, the sports ball, all the perfect distraction from worsening economic insecurity. From more work, less pay, and unrealized fruits of labor. I'm sure there's a Marx quote about this. We can see this phenomenon of distraction very clearly with advertising. What's always advertised at New Year's? Weightlifting. What vehicles do we always see in commercials acting free and independent? Big trucks. And what form of media is synonymous with ads? Why, it's sports. Every team and player has a sponsor. Every event has ads plastered everywhere. They're so inescapable we don't even notice how many there are anymore. Except in racing. That shit's actually diabolical. With those root causes finally explored, it's time to recap once again. The facade of masculinity is caused partly by homophobia, partly by economic insecurity. Both of these things are caused by capitalism. We could get even more deep into the root causes of capitalism itself, talking about humanity and the universe and whatever, but I think we're good at the least common denominator, that being capitalism. So now I've complained for a while. Hooray, fragility, facades. What's next? Solutions. Really. So, while we hope for capitalism, the cause of so much of this tension, to go away, what can we gays, and non-gays too of course, do about these facades of masculinity? Well, I guess it's pretty simple. We could put them up less. I know, groundbreaking. I guess what I mean to say is this. All of us, and I mean all of us, have to pretend to be someone else, someone stronger sometimes. It can be for work, for sports, for school, for family, for anything really. But in between all those things, there's free time, there's friendship, there's community. I know it can be hard in these times, but I can't overstate how important it is to find a person or people you can be your true self around. Before I met my boyfriend, I had a rough time being myself and put up that facade of masculinity a lot. I was only ever really my true self online, and that kinda sucked. I spent a lot of time discovering who I was and putting myself out there these last few years, at least in the real world. And through this channel, I hope to put myself out there once again in a new way. And even if no one watches, I don't really care. This is just for me. By being my full true self in these videos, I can get a break from all that tiring and soul-sucking mask wearing that I will probably always have to deal with one way or another. But by choosing to do things where I have the freedom to be myself, I can step through that facade of masculinity and embrace being who I am.